Jung's most unsettling discovery wasn't centered on mental illness. It was about people who notice what others overlook and why this ability often destroys them. In his clinical work, Jung recorded cases of patients with what he termed differentiated perception. Individuals able to detect micro-expressions, sense hidden emotions, and recognize psychological patterns invisible to everyone else. They could see through social masks, identify dishonesty instantly, and pick up on the unconscious tension present in any room. Jung considered this discovery dangerous because these individuals often ended up isolated, drained, and unable to sustain normal relationships. Not because they were unstable, but because perceiving everything carried a psychological burden no one fully understood. Today, I'll share Jung's most dangerous insight about people with this rare awareness, and why he believed such perception could either break you or transform you into something exceptional. The case that first revealed this insight involved a patient Jung, described in private notes. She was a deeply introverted, intuitive personality who sought him out in 1913, during Jung's own psychological turmoil following his split with Freud. This patient, later representing what Jung classified as one of the rarest personality types, possessed what he called undifferentiated, intuitive perception. She could enter any room and immediately read the psychological atmosphere. Who was hiding pain, who was lying, and who held unspoken resentment. Jung wrote, "The patient displays an extraordinary capacity for perceiving unconscious contents in others. Yet this ability brings her distress rather than benefit. She struggled with small talk because every social pretense was obvious to her. Friendships were impossible, as others felt uncomfortably exposed in her presence. Steady employment proved equally unattainable, since her awareness disrupted the unspoken agreements that hold groups together." Jung realized he wasn't observing a mental disorder. Instead, he was witnessing what happens when the unconscious becomes too conscious, when perception grows too sharp for ordinary social life. She described others with startling precision, as if she could access their hidden motives and unspoken thoughts. When Jung carefully tested her observations, they proved consistently accurate. This wasn't delusion or psychosis. It was consciousness so heightened that it became socially hazardous. Jung uncovered something even more unsettling. This patient's remarkable perception seemed almost impossible to explain. As a result, Jung began examining what he later described as participation mystique, a psychological phenomenon in which individuals with highly developed intuition become deeply affected by unconscious material from others. In his Red Book notes, Jung wrote, "There are those among us whose psychic system is so finely attuned that they absorb not only conscious exchanges but also the unconscious atmosphere of their surroundings." Modern research by Dr. Elaine Aron on highly sensitive individuals supports Jung's early findings, showing that about 20% of people experience elevated emotional and sensory sensitivity. Yet Jung identified something even more precise in his typology, the introverted intuitive type, representing roughly 1% of the population. These individuals don't just feel deeply, they perceive unconscious patterns with striking clarity. Jung explained that such people possess a differentiated intuitive function. Their minds process not only explicit social signals, but also hidden emotional states, suppressed material, and underlying psychological dynamics. They notice the sadness behind a forced smile, the despair beneath a confident facade, and the collective blind spots that groups prefer to overlook. Jung remarked, "The danger lies not in the perception itself, but in the psychic isolation it creates. When one sees what others cannot or will not see, one becomes a mirror that society struggles to face." He called this the problem of the superior function, when a person's greatest strength also becomes their greatest burden, distancing them from the collective unconscious. But Jung found the real issue was not the perception itself. Those with finely tuned intuition inevitably perceive what lies hidden in others, which makes them frequent targets of shadow projection. Jung documented how people unconsciously attack those who reflect the aspects of themselves they refuse to confront. In Psychology of the Unconscious, Jung observed, nothing has a stronger psychological effect on the environment, and especially on one's children, than the unlived life of the parent. He noted that this principle applies across all relationships. When someone's shadow is revealed by another person's clear perception, the unconscious reacts in one of two ways, either integrating the shadow or attacking the mirror. Jung repeatedly saw this dynamic in his clinical work. The one who perceives truth is often blamed for creating the very issues they merely observe. His patients with strong intuitive awareness experienced this often when they carefully suggested that someone seemed troubled. The response was anger or accusations of negativity. When people pointed out clear problems, they were often accused of being judgmental or of creating issues where none actually existed. Jung recognized this was not random, it was a psychological defense. In Memories, Dreams, Reflections, he wrote, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Yet, most people find it easier to attack the one reflecting their hidden traits than to examine what's being revealed. This is what Jung described as the scapegoat phenomenon. Highly perceptive individuals often become labeled as the problem within groups, not because they generate conflict, but because they expose what already exists in the collective unconscious. Jung observed, the bearer of superior perception becomes the repository for all that the group cannot consciously acknowledge about itself. This helps explain why such individuals don't just feel misunderstood. They feel systematically targeted by forces they can't easily rationalize. But Jung's most unsettling insight was still ahead. He found that heightened perception didn't appear the same in everyone. Instead, it manifested in 4 distinct patterns within the introverted intuitive type, each representing a unique way of processing unconscious material. Type 1. The feeling. Intuitive Jung described patients who combined introverted intuition with strong feeling functions. These people don't just recognize psychological dynamics, they physically feel them. They absorb emotions so deeply that they often confuse their own feelings with those taken in from others. Jung noted, the feeling intuitive lives in a state of continual emotional contagion, experiencing the unexpressed emotions of those around them. Type 2. The thinking intuitive. These individuals recognize psychological patterns and predict outcomes with striking accuracy. Jung observed they could foresee relationship breakdowns, career failures, and personal crises long before they happened, not through rational analysis, but through unconscious recognition. He wrote, they possess an uncanny ability to perceive the logical conclusions of unconscious processes invisible to others. Type 3, the sensation intuitive. This group senses the physical expression of psychological states. They detect illness before symptoms surface, notice fatigue before it's admitted, and pick up bodily tension linked to hidden emotional distress. Jung wrote, these individuals act as early warning systems for both psychological and physical disturbances in their environment. Type 4. The pure intuitive. The rarest group Jung encountered combined introverted intuition with an undifferentiated auxiliary function. They perceived everything, but struggled to organize or clearly express their insights. Jung noted they live in a constant state of overwhelm, receiving vast amounts of unconscious material without sufficient structure to process it constructively. Recognizing your own pattern is essential, since each requires different methods for what Jung called the integration challenge. But first, it's important to see why he considered this discovery dangerous. Jung observed that unchecked perception carried serious risks. He concluded that perceiving everything without psychological integration could threaten both individual and collective well-being. He identified 3 main dangers. Danger 1, disruption of the collective unconscious. Jung wrote, The individual who perceives too clearly threatens the collective agreements upon which social cohesion depends. When someone sees through the illusions that keep groups stable, they become destabilizing forces. Families, organizations, and societies rely partly on unspoken agreements to overlook certain truths. Highly perceptive individuals break these agreements simply by existing authentically. Danger 2. Psychological isolation. Jung described this as the problem of superior function. The very strength of differentiated perception often becomes a source of suffering. He wrote, "The curse of consciousness is that it cannot be shared with those who do not possess it." The individual becomes an island of awareness in an ocean of unconsciousness. This isolation is not only social, but also existential. Many such individuals report feeling as if they live in a different reality than those around them. Danger 3. Identity dissolution. Jung identified one of the most serious risks for people who unconsciously absorb material from others: the erosion of their true identity. When individuals take in too much external psychological content, they lose touch with their authentic self. They become so overwhelmed that they can no longer tell the difference between their own inner experience and what they have absorbed from their surroundings. Jung referred to this as participation mystique, a condition in which personal boundaries dissolve, and the individual becomes merged with the collective unconscious. He cautioned, "The danger is not only social exclusion, but psychological annihilation, the complete loss of individuality to collective possession." For this reason, Jung believed that integrating superior perception was not just valuable in therapy, but a matter of psychological necessity. Without it, the risks were too severe. To address this, Jung designed what he called the individuation process, a structured approach for preserving personal identity while engaging consciously with unconscious material. Phase 1. Recognition and differentiation. Jung taught perceptive individuals to first notice when they were internalizing content that did not belong to them. He described this as conscious discrimination, the ability to separate genuine inner experience from external influences. He stated, "The first task is to know what belongs to you and what belongs to others. Without this clarity, personal development cannot occur." As a practical step, Jung advised patients to spend time alone each day. Solitude allowed the absorbed material to settle so they could better identify their true inner voice. Phase 2. Shadow integration. Jung also found that those who easily detect flaws or shadows in others often fail to acknowledge their own. The stronger one denies personal tendencies toward deception, selfishness, or aggression, the more disturbed one becomes when noticing these traits externally. Jung explained, "Everything that irritates us in others can lead to self-understanding, but only if we are willing to look inward rather than staying focused outward. Integrating the shadow involves accepting that we all share the qualities we observe in others. Recognizing this does not make a person bad. It makes them whole, capable of perceiving without judgment." Phase 3. Conscious participation. The final step involves what Jung described as conscious participation in the collective unconscious. This means being able to engage with others' psychological material without losing one's own identity. He observed, "The individuated person serves as a bridge between conscious and unconscious, making the hidden visible for others without sacrificing personal integrity." This requires developing what Jung called psychological containers, the ability to temporarily hold the unconscious material of others while maintaining awareness that it is not one's own. Jung recognized that heightened perception has the power either to destroy or to transform. To understand why some succeed and others collapse, he studied historical examples. The case of Nietzsche, unintegrated perception. Jung was profoundly influenced by Nietzsche's philosophy, but saw how Nietzsche's heightened perception ultimately contributed to psychological breakdown, as described in Memories, Dreams, Reflections. Nietzsche's extraordinary clarity allowed him to see through social, religious, and philosophical illusions with remarkable precision. Yet Jung observed that Nietzsche never learned to integrate these insights in a constructive way. Instead of using perception as a tool for growth and healing, Nietzsche often wielded it as a weapon against society. Jung wrote, "Nietzsche had remarkable insight into human nature, yet he stayed identified with his dominant function instead of integrating it into a balanced personality." Jung observed that Nietzsche's isolation and eventual collapse reflected what happens when heightened perception remains unintegrated. The individual becomes consumed by what they perceive rather than transformed by it. In contrast, Meister Eckhart represented successful integration. Jung studied this medieval mystic extensively, regarding him as an example of fully harmonized, superior perception. Eckhart demonstrated what Jung described as mystical intuition, the capacity to sense spiritual and psychological realities beyond common awareness. Unlike Nietzsche, however, Eckhart directed his insights toward compassionate service. Jung noted, Eckhart transformed his superior perception into wisdom that could nurture others without overwhelming them. He saw with clarity but communicated in ways that invited understanding rather than resistance. Jung emphasized that Eckhart's success stemmed from what he termed conscious humility, the awareness that superior perception is a gift to be shared responsibly, not a tool for domination. Jung also reflected on his own path of integration. Most notably, he documented his struggle with overwhelming perceptions during his confrontation with the unconscious between 1913 and 1919. Recorded in the Red Book, Jung admitted, "I was threatened by psychosis and survived only through my ability to recognize what was happening. Guided by my work with patients, his heightened perception of unconscious material, both his own and that of others, nearly destroyed him until he learned to engage with these experiences consciously." His breakthrough came with the realization that these intense perceptions were not signs of illness, but indicators of psychological evolution. They revealed consciousness striving to grow beyond collective limits. This insight reshaped his therapeutic approach, particularly toward patients with similar sensitivities who often felt isolated. Jung stressed the importance of finding what he called the few who understand, others able to engage with expanded awareness without defensiveness. In The Development of Personality, Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Yet, he argued this privilege cannot unfold in solitude. It requires recognition by those capable of perceiving authenticity. Jung outlined 3 key types of relationships essential for highly perceptive individuals. The first type is fellow individuated persons. Jung explained, an individuated person recognizes another immediately. There is an authenticity, a presence that cannot be imitated. Such encounters often occur suddenly and with intensity, as members of what Jung called the conscious minority recognize one another. Though rare, these connections are vital for psychological well-being, as they allow complete authenticity without fear of rejection or intimidation. Type 2. Those engaged in individuation. Jung noted that individuals actively involved in their own process of individuation, whether through therapy, inner work, or spiritual practice, can often manage heightened perception without becoming defensive. They may not possess this capacity themselves, but they recognize its importance. Jung remarked, those who have begun to know themselves can bear to be known by others. Type 3. Natural containers. Jung also described people who may not hold superior perception but demonstrate what he termed a natural container function, the ability to carry psychological material without being overwhelmed. These are often mature individuals who have endured and grown through significant life experiences. The recognition process. Jung outlined indicators for identifying safe relationships. They respond with genuine questions instead of immediate defensiveness. They can acknowledge contradictions and limitations without shame. They show what Jung called psychological mindedness, an openness to inner reality. They remain emotionally steady when faced with uncomfortable truths. They display real curiosity about consciousness and growth. The gradual revelation protocol. Jung emphasized a careful process for disclosing perceptive abilities. Start with small, gentle observations. Watch how they respond to feedback. Assess whether they react defensively or with curiosity. Increase depth gradually, according to their capacity. Frame insights as contributions rather than declarations. Jung stressed that the aim is not to find people who accept everything you perceive, but those who treat your insights as meaningful contributions instead of threats. Integrated perception supports both personal growth and collective development. Thus, Jung saw individuation as essential not only for individual well-being, but also for the evolution of human consciousness. In The Undiscovered Self, he wrote, "The individual has always been the bearer of the living spirit, the one who brings change to society." He described those who integrate superior perception as culture carriers, individuals who advance consciousness itself. The 4 stages of transformation. Stage 1. Recognition without overwhelm. This stage arises when you acknowledge your perceptive abilities without being crushed by them. Jung called this conscious acceptance of the superior function. He wrote, "The beginning of wisdom is the recognition of what one actually is, not what one wishes to be or fears to be." Stage 2. Integration without isolation. Here, perception is applied constructively while maintaining meaningful relationships. Jung referred to this as social individuation, becoming your authentic self while staying connected to others. He observed that the individuated person does not retreat from the world, but engages with it more consciously. Stage 3. Service without sacrifice. At this stage, perception becomes a gift to offer rather than a burden to bear. Jung described this as conscious participation, using one's abilities in service of others without depleting oneself. He wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and then to offer that authentic self in service of the whole." Stage 4. Legacy without attachment. The final stage involves what Jung called the transcendent function, using perception to contribute to collective evolution without being attached to recognition or acceptance. Jung observed, "The individuated person works for the future, not for personal recognition in the present." The integration becomes cultural medicine. Jung believed that those who integrate superior perception play a vital evolutionary role. They perceive what collective consciousness has not yet accepted, helping prepare humanity for necessary growth. Jung once wrote, "What is not brought to consciousness comes to us as fate." He emphasized that individuals with heightened perception who practice integration can make unconscious material conscious before it surfaces destructively in collective behavior. Yet Jung also warned of specific pitfalls that can derail this process of transformation. The journey of integrating higher perception carries unique risks, which he carefully documented. Pitfall 1. The inflation trap. Jung discussed at length the danger of psychological inflation. This occurs when individuals identify with their superior function instead of integrating it with awareness. In his essays on analytical psychology, he cautioned, "The danger is that the ego identifies with the archetype, leading to an inflation that cuts the individual off from human relationships." Many highly perceptive people fall into what Jung termed the prophet complex, the belief that they must rescue others from unconsciousness. This mindset often results in moralizing, judgment, and ultimately isolation. Jung noted The moment one believes oneself to be the bearer of absolute truth, one has fallen into the trap of unconscious possession by the very forces one seeks to understand. Pitfall 2. Withdrawal and justification. Jung also observed individuals who use their heightened perception to justify withdrawing completely from society. They convinced themselves that others were too unconscious to engage with, which he recognized as false spiritual superiority. He wrote, "True individuation requires engagement with the unconscious world, not escape from it. The hermit who withdraws from life has not transcended it, but has been overcome by it." Pitfall 3. The helper's trap. Some individuals define themselves entirely by their ability to perceive and assist others, becoming dependent on being needed. In this process, they lose sight of their own growth. Jung warned, when perception becomes identity, the person disappears behind the function. This is not individuation, but its opposite, the sacrifice of personality to role. Pitfall 4. The overwhelm return. Even those who achieve integration can regress during times of stress, trauma, or major transitions. In such moments, they may lose psychological boundaries and once again absorb the unconscious material of others. Jung stressed, integration is not a permanent achievement, but a dynamic process requiring constant conscious attention. Maintaining integration to sustain healthy integration. Jung suggested ongoing practices, regular solitude to separate personal material from absorbed influences, deliberate choice about when and with whom to use perceptive abilities, continuous shadow work to avoid projection, building connections with supportive others who can provide reality checks, engaging in creative expression as an outlet for intense perceptual input. As Jung explained, the integrated person does not achieve perfection, but learns to dance consciously with their own psychological complexity, the broader role of superior perception. Jung framed heightened perception within the context of collective development. He believed such individuals play a vital evolutionary role for human consciousness. In The Undiscovered Self, he wrote, "The individual has always been the carrier of the living spirit, the one who brings about the change in society." He saw perceptive individuals as consciousness pioneers, whose psychological development precedes society's readiness. History shows that such figures often appear before collective culture can fully absorb their insights, serving as scouts into new psychological territories. Jung observed, what appears in the individual first as psychological insight later manifests in the collective as cultural transformation. The individual serves as a laboratory for consciousness experiments that will eventually benefit the whole. Modern expressions. Jung believed that in today's world, highly perceptive people may sense psychological patterns shaping collective behavior, environmental and social instability before others notice, spiritual possibilities beyond current religions, technological consequences others overlook, and shadow aspects of society that demand conscious integration. Jung's insight was clear. Sensitive individuals feel collective challenges first and most strongly. Their personal struggles often mirror what the wider culture needs to address. Service without martyrdom. He emphasized that superior perception helps human evolution most when it is consciously integrated, rather than unconsciously endured. The aim is not to become a martyr of awareness, but a bridge between what exists and what is emerging. Jung explained, the individuated person serves the collective not by sacrificing their individuality, but by developing it so fully that it becomes a gift to all. The highest integration. At advanced development, Jung observed, individuals with superior perception hold their awareness lightly, seeing clearly without clinging to outcomes, accepting what is, and perceiving deeply without feeling forced to fix everything. He called this the transcendent function, the ability to support the growth of consciousness naturally without preaching. simply by living in more conscious ways. Think of Jung's patient from 1913, the introverted intuitive who sought his help during his own psychological crisis. After 3 years of working through individuation, her life shifted dramatically. She learned to separate her own inner contents from what she absorbed from others. She became a counselor, using her refined perception to help those in need. She built relationships with people who valued her insight instead of fearing it. Most importantly, she stopped experiencing her perception as a curse and began to see it as Jung described, a gift requiring conscious development. Jung documented her transformation. She did not learn to see less, but to see more wisely. She did not lose her depth, but became more deliberate in how she engaged with it. Her ability stayed intact, but her relationship to it became integrated rather than overwhelming. This reflects Jung's most dangerous discovery. Some are born with awareness far ahead of collective readiness. Such advanced perception can either isolate and overwhelm them or evolve them into what humanity most needs for psychological progress. Your heightened perception is not a defect. It is an advanced function of consciousness. You are not broken because you notice what others miss. You are simply ahead of your time. The real question isn't whether you should dim your perception to fit into the collective unconscious. It's whether you'll develop the individuation skills to integrate it consciously. Jung's method of individuation provides a path from isolation to service, from overwhelm to wisdom, from curse to contribution. You were born to see, not to suffer, but to support the evolution of awareness. The world needs your insights, but it needs them expressed with wisdom, integration, and strategy, so that what seems dangerous becomes medicine for culture. Your gift itself is not the burden, your unconscious relationship to it is. Once you integrate it consciously, you embody exactly what Jung believed highly perceptive individuals were meant to be. Pioneers of consciousness, preparing humanity for psychological growth that is inevitable but not yet visible. Jung's most dangerous discovery wasn't that some see everything, but that many who see do not learn to use their vision wisely. The risk is not in perception itself, but in failing to develop a conscious relationship with extraordinary abilities. You are not too much for this world. You are precisely what consciousness evolution requires. Once you learn to wield your perception as Jung did his, the danger of perceiving everything isn't in the seeing. It's in not learning to see with the integration and wisdom your gifts demand. If you recognize yourself in Jung's description of the highly perceptive individual, you belong to a rare psychological type he considered vital for the evolution of consciousness. Share in the comments what type of differentiated perceiver you are. Your individuation journey connects you to others on the same path. Subscribe for more insights into Jung's discoveries about psychological growth that surpass collective unconscious limits. And if you want to explore further, check out my video on 7 dangerous Carl Jung psychology places that damage your mind, where I explain the environments most harmful to highly sensitive individuals, and Jung's strategies for protecting consciousness while engaging with an unconscious world. Thank you for watching. See you in the next dimension.